Hello and welcome. I'm glad you're here tonight. This is your time to slow down, to let the day fall quietly behind you, and to rest in a story told gently at an easy pace. Tonight's story is about a forgotten garden, hidden behind an old house at the edge of a village. What begins as a place of silence and neglect slowly becomes a space of peace and renewal, showing how even the quietest corners of life can bloom again with care. It's a calm, soothing tale meant to help you drift into rest. If you enjoy these calming bedtime stories, you can always find more here on this channel. Each story is created to bring you comfort at the end of the day, to ease your thoughts and help you sleep. If that's something you like more of, I'd love for you to stay connected by subscribing, so you'll have new stories waiting whenever you need them. Let's start. The road that wound through the countryside was quiet at this time of year. Grass leaned long over its edges, brushing against boots and cart wheels, whispering with each shift of wind. Few people passed this way anymore, and those who did often moved quickly, eyes set on reaching the busier towns to the south. But Mara was not in a hurry. Her steps were slow, steady, almost cautious, as though she wasn't walking toward something, but away. The weight she carried wasn't only in the bag across her shoulders. It was in the slope of her spine and the tightness around her breath. She had left the city weeks ago. At first, her plan had been simple: walk until the noise faded, stay nowhere long enough to be noticed. But the farther she walked, the more she found herself searching for quiet places, corners of the world where she could sit without explanation. It was near evening when she first saw the lane, a narrow track half hidden between hedges leading away from the main road. She followed it without thinking. The hedges grew thick as she went deeper, branches stretching overhead to tangle like hands until the air felt muted, almost enclosed. At the very end, a house stood. It wasn't ruined, though the years had pressed heavy on it. The stone walls were streaked dark from rain, and ivy covered half the windows. A gate leaned across its entrance, paint peeled to gray, wood swollen from weather. Behind it, a garden stretched, or what had once been a garden. Mara stopped. The air smelled of damp earth and green things left too long to themselves. Grass reached high, swallowing what might once have been flower beds. Brambles crowded, the edges curling like claws. Yet through the wildness, she could see shapes: the curve of a stone path, the broken rim of a fountain, a bench half hidden under vines. She placed her hand against the gate. The wood was rough, splintered beneath her palm. With a small push, it creaked open, slow and heavy, as though unused for years. The garden waited. Mara stepped inside. The ground was soft, her boots sinking into moss and grass. She walked forward, brushing her fingers against tall stems. The air was cooler here, shaded, carrying a faint sweetness beneath the damp. She reached the bench and sat. Ivy had grown thick across its back, but the stone was still solid beneath her. From here, she could see the whole space, overgrown, forgotten, yet not lifeless. Birds moved through the hedges. A butterfly hovered briefly over a patch of weeds that had flowered without permission. She let out a breath. She hadn't known she was holding. For the first time in days, she felt still. The bell from the village square rang faintly in the distance. Evening deepened. Shadows stretched across the garden, softening its wildness into shapes that almost looked intentional. Mara stayed until the stars began to show, her body heavy with a calm she hadn't expected. Then she stood, brushing the moss from her hands, and walked back to the gate. As she closed it behind her, she thought, without quite meaning to, "I'll come back tomorrow." Morning came quiet, the sky pale with early light. Mara rose from the small room she had rented in the village and found her steps already turning down the lane again. When she reached the house, the garden seemed different. Not changed, still tangled, still hushed, but somehow less distant, as though it had accepted her return. She crouched near the path, the one she had noticed before, buried under moss. Kneeling, she ran her hand across the stones. The surface was damp, rough with age. Slowly, she began pulling away the moss and weeds. It wasn't easy work. Some roots clung stubbornly. But with each patch she cleared, the outline of the path showed through, gray stone against dark soil. Her breath fell into rhythm. Pull, loosen, clear, rest. Pull again. By the time she sat back, only a small section was visible. It wasn't much, not compared to the whole, but it was enough. Enough to see where the garden had once been guided. Enough to remind her that under all the overgrowth, there was still form, still intention. She stayed for hours, moving from one corner to another, clearing here, untangling there. She didn't try to finish. She didn't need to dot when her hands grew sore. She sat again on the bench. The earth clung under her nails, dark and cool. She stared at the small spaces she had uncovered, each one a breath of clarity in the wildness. It struck her then how much she felt the same. Layers of thought and regret had grown over her in the city. Expectations, failures, words she never said. She had carried them for so long. They had become part of her. Yet, kneeling in the soil, pulling weeds, she felt the faintest echo. Maybe it was possible to loosen them too, not all at once. Just a little at a time. The breeze moved through, the ivy lifting strands of hair against her face. She closed her eyes and let it pass, soft as a hand brushing across her cheek. When she opened them again, she thought, tomorrow. I'll come again tomorrow. The days that followed fell into a quiet rhythm. Each morning, Mara walked the lane, pushed, opened the groaning gate, and stepped into the stillness. She cleared slowly, never rushing. Some mornings, she uncovered more of the stone path. Other mornings, she trimmed back brambles along the wall, freeing shapes of forgotten rose bushes. Once, she found the old fountain at the center, its basin filled with dirt and leaves, but the carved rim still strong. The work was simple, but never easy. Her hands blistered, her back ached, yet she didn't stop. Something about the garden held her. Sometimes she spoke aloud, though no one was there. Simple words, here you are, when she uncovered a patch of stone. Or, you've waited long enough, as she freed a rose branch from thorns. She wasn't sure who she was speaking to. The garden, maybe? Or herself, the villagers began to notice. A woman selling bread in the square asked her where she walked each day. A child pointed at the lane and whispered, that's where she goes. No one followed, though. They only watched, curious but distant. One evening, as Mara sat on the bench, dirt streaked across her arms. She looked around and realized the garden was beginning to change. The wildness was still there, but patches of order had begun to show. A path curving from the gate, the faint outline of beds, the fountain standing clear at the center. She felt a stirring in her chest. Not joy exactly, not pride, but something quieter, something steadier. The garden wasn't whole. Neither was she, but both were beginning, and for the first time in years, that felt enough. By the fourth morning, Mara no longer needed to remind herself to return. Her body moved as though it knew, her feet carrying her down the lane before she had fully decided. The garden had become part of her day, as natural as eating or sleeping. She pushed the gate open. The same groan echoed into the cool air. But now, beyond it, change showed. Small, subtle things. A stretch of path visible where moss had been cleared. The shape of the fountain standing unburied, its basin empty but clean. The outline of beds edging back into view. She stood for a moment at the gate, taking it in. The garden was still wild, still vast in its neglect, but the smallest order had begun to return. Mara walked to the fountain. She crouched and brushed her hands across the carved stone. The basin was cracked, the lines filled with dirt, yet her fingers traced the shapes of flowers chiseled there, worn but still present. She wondered who had carved them. Her mind turned to the people who must have once tended this place. Someone had planned the curves of the path, chosen where the roses would grow, built the bench with its sturdy stone legs. Someone had sat here long before her, hands brushing soil, heart heavy or light in ways she could never know. The thought didn't make her sad. If anything, it made her feel less alone. She rose and returned to her work. Brambles had tangled across the north wall, thick and thorned. Slowly, carefully, she began to cut them back. Each tug pulled against her, sharp thorns scratching her hands. She winced more than once, but she didn't stop. By midday, the wall began to show itself. Behind the curtain of brambles, ivy still grew, but stone gleamed faintly through the green. She leaned close, brushing her hands across it, and discovered carvings etched into the stone. Not elaborate, just simple lines of vines and leaves. She traced them with her finger. Someone had cared enough to place these here, where no one might notice but those who truly looked. Mara stepped back, breathing slow. She felt tired, but her chest carried a steadiness that had been missing for years. She sat on the bench, wiping dirt from her palms. The garden stretched before her, still vast, still waiting. Yet she felt no urgency. It didn't need to be finished. It only needed to be met. Day by day, her thoughts drifted to her own life. The things she had abandoned, dreams left behind, relationships frayed by silence, parts of herself she no longer recognized. She realized how much of her own inner ground had been left wild, tangled, unvisited. Perhaps that was why she kept coming here. The garden mirrored her. Each root she loosened, each stone she uncovered, reminded her that beneath the weight, something still waited. Something patient, something alive. It was near evening when Mara walked back through the square. The baker, a stout man with flour still dusting his hands, leaned against his stall and nodded toward her. "You've been out by the old place, haven't you?" he said. Mara hesitated. "Yes." He raised a brow, though not unkindly. "Most leave it be. Nobody's tended that garden in decades." "Why?" she asked. He shrugged. "Belonged to a family that left after hard times. Some say they couldn't bear it anymore, the memories. Others say the place simply fell quiet and never woke again." Mara waited, but he said no more. He only looked at her with mild curiosity, then returned to his bread. That night, lying in her rented room, Mara thought about his words. A family leaving behind their garden. What sorrow had driven them? And why did no one else care to reclaim it? Her thoughts lingered, but instead of weighing heavy, they felt like seeds pressing into soil. Not answers, but beginnings. Days stretched into weeks. Mara kept tending, slowly, steadily, never forcing. One morning, as she cleared weeds from a bed near the fountain, she noticed something small, a stem, green and tender, rising through the soil. At first she thought it was another weed, but when she brushed the dirt aside, she saw the curve of a bud, pale and closed. She sat back, heart quiet but full. This had been here all along, waiting beneath the soil. Over the next days, more shoots appeared. Some near the path, some hidden at the edges. The garden was waking, not because she had made it, but because she had given it space to breathe again. When the first flower opened, a soft bloom of pale yellow, she found herself kneeling in the grass, simply watching. The petals trembled in the breeze, fragile but unafraid. She whispered without thinking, "You're still here." The words caught in her chest, heavy with meaning she hadn't expected. Not just the flower. Her she was still here too. Beneath everything, despite everything, something in her had endured. Another week passed before Mara found something hidden at the far edge of the garden. She had been working near the wall, clearing ivy where it climbed heavy over the stones. As she pulled back one long strand, she noticed the corner of wood pressed, close to the ground. Curious, she tugged the vines away until a small door revealed itself, low and narrow, built into the wall itself. The wood was weathered, the iron latch rusted, but it was still whole. Kneeling, Mara brushed dirt from the frame. It wasn't a gate to anywhere. It opened only into a shallow alcove, no bigger than a cupboard. Inside, damp leaves had gathered, and the smell of earth was thick. But among them, her hand brushed against something harder. She pulled it out carefully. A box, no larger than a book, its surface warped by time. The clasp crumbled in her fingers, and when she lifted the lid, she found a bundle of papers inside. Ink was faded, but she could still read pieces of the writing. Letters, notes, some addressed simply to the garden. Others unsigned, just words left behind. Her breath caught as she read, "Today the roses opened by the fountain. I wish you had seen them. The children played here until the sun fell. Their laughter still lingers. I will not forget. Even if I must go, I will not forget." Mara closed the box, her hands trembling lightly. She set it on her lap and sat back in the grass. The garden had not only been tended, it had been loved. Every stone, every carving, every planted bed was part of someone's memory. And when they left a part of themselves here. Tucked in words where only the garden might keep them, she placed the box gently on the bench beside her. The garden braved around her in its quiet way. She felt almost as if she was not alone. Word of her work spread slowly, carried in quiet ways of small places. A woman selling fruit offered her a basket of apples one morning, saying softly, "For your garden." A boy passing her on the lane paused to ask, "Are there really flowers blooming again?" One evening, the innkeeper where Mara Lodge spoke. As she poured tea, "My grandmother used to tell stories of that house," she said. "A family once lived there, kind family. They kept the garden open to the village. Children played there, neighbors sat under the trees. She said it felt like a place that belonged to everyone, until the innkeeper's voice trailed, but Mara didn't press. Some silences carried their own meaning. Instead, she asked, "Do you remember it yourself?" The woman shook her head. "By my time, it was already closed. But sometimes I think the ground remembers." Mara carried that thought with her the next day as she worked among the beds. Perhaps the ground did remember. Perhaps every root, every stone, held memory like water dot, and perhaps by tending it, she was not only healing herself, but also listening to voices left behind. Spring deepened. Days grew longer, light stretching across the stones. The garden responded. Shoots pushed through soil where Mara had cleared space. Buds formed at the tips of branches she had freed from brambles. Color returned slowly, first pale whites and yellows, then stronger reds and purples. One morning, she stepped through the gate and stopped still. Overnight, the roses by the fountain had opened, dozens of them unfurling their petals into the morning air. Their scent drifted soft, sweet without being heavy. Mara walked closer, hand brushing one bloom gently. The petals were delicate, almost translucent in the light. She bent her head, breathing in the fragrance, and felt something inside her chest. Loosened out, she had not realized how long she had been waiting for this. The garden was not only alive again, it was beautiful. Not perfect, not orderly, but alive in its own way, carrying both wildness and care. That evening, as she sat on the bench, villagers began to gather near the gate. A few at first, then more, peering in, whispering quietly. She didn't call them in, didn't wave them away. She only sat, and the garden spoke for itself. One child ran forward, touching the stone path with bright eyes. The mother followed, hesitant but smiling, whispering, "I haven't walked here since I was a girl." Mara watched as the space filled with gentle footsteps. The garden, once silent, was breathing with voices again, and in that moment she understood it had never truly been hers. She was only the one who listened long enough to open the gate. As weeks passed, Mara still came each day. She worked, but less now. Much of her time was spent simply walking the paths, or sitting by the fountain, or speaking with those who came to visit. Sometimes children brought her wildflowers to plant. Sometimes the baker left fresh bread on the bench. One afternoon, the innkeeper herself walked through the gate, tears in her eyes as she touched the carvings on the wall she remembered from her grandmother. As stories, the garden was whole again, though not as it once had been. It carried scars of years lost, but it bloomed around them. Mara felt the same. She was not who she had been and never would be again. But within her, space had opened. Roots had settled. One evening, as the sky glowed with the last light of day, she took the box of letters from its hiding place and placed it on the fountain's edge. Around it, flowers stirred in the breeze. "This is yours," she whispered. "I was only keeping it safe." The words felt final, but not heavy. She had given back what belonged, and in return, the garden had given her what she hadn't known she needed. A place to begin again. As the stars rose, lanterns lit one by one in the village, and laughter drifted faint from the square. Mara stayed. In the garden, eyes half closed, body at rest. For the first time in years, she felt not only peaceful, but whole. The forgotten garden was forgotten no longer. And neither was she.